and welcome to another treatment of the International Sunday School lesson. Today's lesson is entitled Called to Follow. And it's taken from Luke the 5th chapter, verses 1 through 11. And it's for January the 10th, 2021, winter quarter, lesson number 6. Now, a little background information. Today's lesson talks about an event that happened on the Sea of Galilee when Jesus was interacting with the disciples. Now, the Sea of Galilee, you will see it mentioned several times in the Bible, and it's called by a few different names. There are places where it is referred to as the Sea of Tiberias, and of course the Sea of Galilee, or the Sea of Gennesaret. In the Old Testament, it was referred to as Kinneret or Kinnereth. And interestingly, it is the second lowest lake in the world, and it's the lowest freshwater lake in the world, with the Dead Sea being the lowest lake in the world. Okay? Now, Luke 5, 1 through 3. One day as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, the people were crowding around him and listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. Now there's a big major point that I want to make to you today, and that is that God uses us within our individuality, within our particular calling, within our particular way that we have lived our lives, and our particular professions. Now, think about King David when he was a young boy, and how that young shepherds would use slingshots to protect the sheep and run off wild animals. And we see how that when David went out to face Goliath, that God let him use the tools of his trade to conquer Goliath. He had been a shepherd all those years in his father's employ, and God used the tools of his trade to bring the defeat of the giant Goliath. Also, too, think about Moses. When Moses was at the burning bush, and Moses had been for 40 years, had been a shepherd in the wilderness, with his father-in-law Jethro, and had been a shepherd. And so, as any shepherd, he would have a shepherd's staff with him. It was simply the tools of a trade. The same way that a mechanic would have wrenches and a carpenter would have hammer and nails, a shepherd would naturally have a shepherd's staff. So Moses comes upon the burning bush, And the Lord says, Moses, what is that in your hand? Cast it down. And that's how God was speaking with Moses. And if you look how he interacted and what he took with him when he faced the Pharaoh, the king of the Egyptians, he had his shepherd's staff. It was still the tool of his trade was there with him, and it was what God used in him to work a mighty work of God. I think about Paul. Paul, he had studied at the feet of Gamaliel and had all of that training before he became a Christian. And God used all of that good theological training he got by studying at the feet of Gamaliel. God used that and empowered that as Paul began to write the epistles and to teach and preach in the Christian church. And I want us to really think about that. If God calls you and you're a mason and a bricklayer, there are going to be times where God's going to use that gifting that you have. If when God calls you, you're a musician, there are going to be times where God's going to use that gifting and the talent that you have. If God saves you and calls you and you have been a school teacher for several years, God's going to use that gifting and training and talent for His honor and glory. The same way with any of our talents and the things that we learn in our professions, God will use us and enhance us and use us for His kingdom by our particular gifting. God did not call every Christian to be a pastor. God did not call every Christian to be a missionary in a foreign field. But God called a multitude of different people with a multitude of different giftings and a multitude of different training to put together and to help and build His bride, the church of the living God. And we should be mindful of that and to use that gifting however God sees fit for us to serve Him. And there's a lot of various things that God can make use of. I mean, just think of Moses with his shepherd's staff and how that tool of his trade became such an integral part of the calling out of the Jews out of Egypt, and how it became an intricate part of his interaction with Pharaoh, and how God had used the tool of his trade. And we need to be mindful of that. Be sensitive to the particular talents and the training that God has allowed you to have in this world, in this secular world, and in every opportunity, use that training for God's glory. Okay? Now, Luke 5, 4 through 5, when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets." Now, how many times we've read in the Bible of things that did not make sense, that seemed strange, where God gave instructions and people were obedient and a great miracle happened. Just think about the fall of Jericho. There they were going up against this mighty power in the land of the day. Jericho was a rich, productive city with big, high towers. And you would think that they would need to bring out their most useful swords and spears and catapults and whatever they could get their hands on to do Jericho in. But that's not what God told them to do. God told them to take trumpets and go around that city a certain specific number of times and blow their trumpets. When they gave that loud shout, the walls of Jericho fell down. Didn't make a lot of sense, but they went ahead and did it anyway. Now, think about Naaman. There he was, he had leprosy. And the prophet told him to go in the river. And it wasn't even that good of a river. Naaman said, we got rivers where I come from. I could have washed in a river that was even better and cleaner than this one. This is nothing but old muddy water. And you want me to go down into this muddy water and dip 7 times? What is this? But Naaman was obedient to what God told him to do through the prophet. And his obedience was honored. Now, what do you think would have happened if Naaman had refused? Naaman would have died a leper. His obedience was being honored. Now, Simon and the other fishermen, because they were obedient, God was going to honor their obedience. Notice that they were very specific in following the Lord's instructions. They didn't add a bunch of things to it. They didn't modify it. They didn't do anything like that. They just went ahead and did exactly what the Lord told them to do and did it in the most logical manner possible. They'd been using nets all night. They went ahead. Jesus didn't tell them to do anything different. So they went out and they used the nets. and they hauled in all those fish. Now, what do you think would have happened if they'd have went out and they said, well, let's try something different, and they made up some stuff like, let's use spears instead of nets? Well, they wouldn't have caught all those fish. So we need to be careful that we correctly hear and listen to God's leading when He leads us in a certain direction. I remember quite well a good number of years ago, me and some buddies of mine, and I felt like we needed to do this. We held a crusade at one of the local recreation parks. And we're going to lure the kids in with a karate demonstration, break some boards, and slice up some fruits with samurai swords and stuff like that. Then we're going to preach to the kids. And I had posters printed up, put posters out, been announcing it on the radio a good number of weeks. And, got my friends all involved in it. And that weekend that we were going to have this big crusade, it was in the last part of March, and we had a big snow, and it was brutally cold that day. We had nobody show up. And my cousin, who was helping me with it, he told me, he said, well, Donnie, I know you said that you felt the Lord led you to give put this crusade on and everything. He said, but by any chance, did you ask Him what day you were supposed to do the crusade? And that has stuck with me, and I think that may be why the Lord led me down that path, just for me to learn that. It's important to get all the details right. You can be led to do something and be doing it on the wrong day, and it's not going to do any good, or at the wrong time, and it's not going to do any good. You can be led to minister a certain way and be trying to minister to the wrong group of people that way, and it not work out. So we have to be real attentive to the ear of the Lord. And if He tells us to go out in the middle in the deep water and do some fishing, and He hadn't told us to use a spear, and we've been using a net all the time, go ahead and use a net. Don't make up stuff as you go. Try to get your instructions right and listen to the Lord's leading. Because if you obey, there's good results that are going to become from that obedience. Okay, Luke, the 5th chapter, verses 6 and 7. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. Now I want you to notice, I want us all to notice something about this. There was not selfishness going on here. And when you are in the Lord's work and God begins to bless, get some teamwork going. Get some people to come in and help you. Share the duties around and nurture people, engage people to work with you to do the Lord's work. We need to all be more concerned about the results instead of who gets the credit for it. Get some help in the Lord's work when you see Him blessing. That's what these fishermen, most of them later became apostles, that's what they did. Okay, Luke 5:89. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. Now, it's real important for us to take this to heart, both at the time of our conversion, the time of our calling, the time when we're every minute in the ministry. We need to be completely convinced of this. God is great and we're not. We need to approach everything in our life with humility and have a appreciation of how great God is. And when God's greatness is manifested, it is God's greatness and not ours. Pride was the original sin, and pride is the number one way that the devil will trip anybody up. Because you can be prideful for good things. You can be prideful for bad things. You can quit you smoking, quit you drinking, quit you cussing, and start going to church and pay you tithes and get prideful and arrogant about it, and you're in as bad a shape as somebody who's out laying drunk. Self-righteous pride will do you in quicker than anything. Please, everyone, keep that in their mind. God is great and I am not. This is not about you. You're not a big shot. You're not a big deal. You're not super righteous. You're not super saint. We are all sinners saved by grace. The only reason why we're getting to go to heaven is because the Son of God came and spilled His blood on that cross, and 3 days later was resurrected with a glorious resurrection. And that is the only reason why we are going to heaven. If it were not for that, we'd all be busting hell wide open. Okay? Now, Luke 5:10 and 11. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on you will fish for people." So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed Him. Left everything. Wow. There was a lot of ramifications to that statement. They had partnerships. They had kinfolk that was depending on them. And when it says they left everything, they left everything. They walked off, from their jobs, from their business, and started becoming disciples of the Lord. They had commitment. And we all need that kind of commitment. Okay, some concluding thoughts. Listen to the Lord. Let's reiterate some things here. Listen to the Lord, obey Him, and don't be prideful. Well, friends, good Lord willing, I'll be back with you next weekend.